Hey Kipsters and Kip families, it's Miss Schultz here. I am so excited to get to do a read aloud with you today. We are going to be reading one of my favorite books. It is called Enemy Pie. You say it, it's called. Good job. In this story, we're going to learn about a boy who thinks he has an enemy named Jeremy Ross. Does anybody know what the word enemy means? Enemy is someone that you don't like or don't get along with. So the boy in this story, our main character, he thinks he has an enemy named Jeremy Ross. As we read, we're going to find out a lot of things about this boy and about his enemy, Jeremy Ross. But the main question that I want you to think about as we read is, how does our main character change from the beginning to the end of the story? We're going to think about how he changes from the to the of the story. Good job. I'm really excited. Let's jump in and do some reading together. Enemy Pie. It should have been a perfect summer. My dad helped me build a treehouse in our backyard. My sister was at camp for 3 whole weeks, and I was on the best baseball team in town. It should have been a perfect summer, but it wasn't. It was all good until Jeremy Ross moved into the neighborhood, right next door to my best friend Stanley. I did not like Jeremy Ross. He laughed at me when he struck me out in a baseball game. He had a party on his trampoline and I wasn't even invited, but my best friend Stanley was. Pause. Let's think about it. He's told us why he doesn't like Jeremy Ross. How do you think Jeremy Ross makes our main character feel when he does things like not inviting him to the trampoline and when he strikes him out in baseball? How do you think that makes him feel? Well, if he doesn't like him, it probably makes him feel bad or like he's not being included in things. Maybe that's why they're enemies. Let's keep reading and see. Jeremy Ross was the one and only person on my enemy list. I never even had an enemy list until he moved into the neighborhood. But as soon as he came along, I needed one. I hung it up in my treehouse where Jeremy Ross was not allowed to go. Dad understood stuff like enemies. He told me that when he was my age, he had enemies too, but he knew a way to get rid of them. I asked him to tell me how. Tell you how? I'll show you how, he said. He pulled a really old recipe book off the kitchen shelf. Inside, there was a worn-out scrap of paper with faded writing. Dad held it up and squinted at it. Enemy pie, he said, satisfied. I wonder what enemy pie is. Let's keep reading and find out. You may be wondering exactly what enemy pie is, and I was wondering too. But Dad said the recipe was so secret, he couldn't even tell me. I decided it must be magic. I begged him to tell me something, anything. I will tell you this, he said. Enemy pie is the fastest known way to get rid of enemies. Pause. Why would our main character want to get rid of his enemy? Well, we know that he doesn't like him and that he makes him feel bad. Maybe he wants to get rid of him because he doesn't want to be around him anymore? Let's read and see if enemy pie will actually do that. Now, of course, this got my mind working. What kinds of things, disgusting things, would I put into a pie for an enemy? I brought Dad some weeds from the garden, but he just shook his head. I brought him earthworms and rocks, but he didn't think he'd need those. I gave him the gum I'd been chewing on all morning. He gave it right back to me. I went out to play alone. I shot baskets until the ball got stuck on the roof. I threw a boomerang that never came back to me. And all the while, I listened to the sounds of my dad chopping and stirring and blending the ingredients of enemy pie. This could be a great summer, after all. Enemy pie was going to be awful. I tried to imagine how horrible it must smell, or worse yet, what it would look like. But when I was in the backyard looking for ladybugs, I smelled something really, really, really good. And as far as I could tell, it was coming from our kitchen. I was a bit confused. Let's think. Why do you think he's confused right now? Well, he's confused because his dad is making enemy pie. And if an enemy is someone you don't like, I think he thought the pie would be disgusting. But the pie smells really, it smells really what? Oh, it smells really good. Maybe that's why he's confused. Let's keep reading. I went in to ask Dad what was wrong. Enemy pie shouldn't smell this good. But Dad was smart. If enemy pie smelled bad, your enemy would never eat it, he said. I could tell he'd made enemy pie before. The buzzer rang and Dad put on the oven mitts and pulled the pie out of the oven. It looked like a plain old pie. It looked good enough to eat. I was catching on. But still, I wasn't really sure how this enemy pie worked. What exactly did it do to enemies? Maybe it made their hair fall out or their breath stinky. Maybe it made bullies cry. I asked Dad, but he was no help. He wouldn't tell me a thing. But while the pie cooled, he filled me in on my job. He talked quietly. There is one part of enemy pie that I can't do. In order for it to work, you need to spend a day with your enemy. Even worse, you have to be nice to him. It's not easy, but that's the only way that enemy pie can work. Are you sure you want to go through with this? Pause. What do you think it's going to be like for our main character to spend the day with his enemy, someone he doesn't like and who isn't very nice to him? Yeah, I think he's probably pretty nervous. He doesn't think it will go well. Of course I was. It sounded horrible. It was scary, but it was worth a try. All I had to do was spend one day with Jeremy Ross. Then he'd be out of my hair for the rest of my life. I rode my bike to his house and knocked on the door. Before we meet Jeremy Ross, let's think about what kind of character he is. We know that he didn't invite our main character to his birthday party. He struck him out in baseball. What kind of character is he? We might be able to say that he's mean or unkind. He doesn't seem very friendly or caring. Let's meet Jeremy Ross and find out what he's like. When Jeremy opened the door, he seemed surprised. He stood on the other side of the door and looked at me, waiting for me to say something. I was nervous. Can you play? I asked. He looked confused. I'll go ask my mom, he said. He came back with his shoes in his hand. His mom walked around the corner to say hello. You boys stay out of trouble, she said, smiling. Why do you think Jeremy Ross is confused when our main character asks him to play? Oh, you're right. I bet he's confused because they're not really friends. If someone who wasn't really your friend asked you to come play, you might be confused too. Let's see what happens. We rode bikes for a while and played on the trampoline. Then we made some water balloons and threw them at the neighbor girls, but we missed. Jeremy's mom made us lunch. After lunch, we went to my house. It was strange, but I was kind of having fun with my enemy. He almost seemed nice. But of course, I couldn't tell Dad that since he had worked so hard to make this enemy pie. Jeremy Ross liked my basketball hoop. He said he wished he had a basketball hoop, but he didn't have room for one. I let him win a game just to be nice. I already noticed that something is changing a little bit. Think about what we already notice is changing or surprising us at this point in the story. I'm a little surprised that it seems like they're having fun together, and our main character doesn't seem to be having a bad time like he thought he would. Jeremy Ross knew how to throw a boomerang. He threw it and it came right back to him. I threw it and it went over my house and into the backyard. When we climbed over the fence to find it, the first thing Jeremy noticed was my treehouse. My treehouse was my treehouse. I was the boss. If my sister wanted in, I didn't have to let her. If my dad wanted in, I didn't have to let him. And if Jeremy wanted in... Can we go in it, he asked. I knew he was going to ask me that. But he was at the top person, the only person on my enemy list. And enemies aren't allowed into my treehouse. But he did teach me to throw a boomerang. And he did have me over for lunch. And he did let me play on his trampoline. He wasn't being a very good enemy. Okay, I said, but hold on. Why do you think he's letting him go into his treehouse right now? Oh, it's like the book said. Jeremy's not being a very good enemy. Maybe he's letting him into the treehouse because they're actually having fun together. I climbed up ahead of him and tore the enemy list off the wall. I had a checkerboard and some cards in the treehouse, and we played games until my dad called us down for dinner. We pretended we didn't hear him, and when he came to get us, we tried to hide from him, but somehow he found us. Dad made us macaroni and cheese for dinner, my favorite. It was Jeremy's favorite too. Maybe Jeremy Ross wasn't so bad after all. I was beginning to think that maybe we should just forget about enemy pie. But sure enough, after dinner, Dad brought out the pie. I watched as he cut the pie into 8 thick slices. Dad, I said, it sure is nice having a new friend in the neighborhood. I was trying to get his attention and trying to tell him that Jeremy Ross was no longer my enemy. But Dad only smiled and nodded. I think he thought I was just pretending. Why do you think that our main character is trying to get his dad's attention to tell him that Jeremy Ross isn't his enemy anymore? Well, the book told me that Jeremy Ross wasn't so bad after all, and that the main character, was beginning to think that they should forget about enemy pie. Maybe he's having second thoughts about feeding this enemy pie to Jeremy. Maybe he doesn't want something bad to happen to him. Let's keep reading. Dad dished up 3 plates side by side, with big pieces of pie and giant scoops of ice cream. He passed one to me and one to Jeremy. Wow, Jeremy said, looking at the pie. My dad never makes pies like this. It was at this point that I panicked. I didn't want Jeremy to eat enemy pie. He was my friend. I couldn't let him eat it. It says, at this point, I panicked. What do you think the word panic means based on the text? Oh, you're right. It means he got really worried or really scared. He didn't want Jeremy to eat the pie. He was his friend. I couldn't let him eat it. He's really worried right now. Jeremy, don't eat it. It's bad pie. I think it's poisonous or something. Jeremy's fork stopped before reaching his mouth. He crumpled his eyebrows and looked at me funny. I felt relieved. I had saved his life. I was a hero. If it's so bad, Jeremy said, why has your dad already eaten half of it? I turned to look at my dad. Sure enough, he was eating enemy pie. Good stuff, he mumbled through a mouthful. And that was all he said. I sat there watching them eat enemy pie for a few seconds. Dad was laughing. Jeremy was happily eating, and neither of them was losing any hair. It seemed safe enough, so I took a tiny taste. Enemy pie was delicious. After dessert, Jeremy rode his bike home, but not before inviting me over to play on his trampoline in the morning. He said he would teach me how to flip. As for enemy pie, I still don't know how to make it. I still wonder if enemies really do hate it, or if their hair falls out, or their breath turns bad. But I don't know if I'll ever get an answer, because I just lost my best enemy. Let's answer a couple questions together before we are all done reading. So we know that our main character wanted to feed his enemy, Jeremy Ross, some enemy pie. I want us to think about what changed from the beginning to the end of the story. Go ahead and take a second to think about that. How did our main character change from the beginning to the end of the story? At the beginning, he really didn't like Jeremy Ross. He wanted to feed him enemy pie so that he wouldn't be his enemy anymore and he could get rid of him. But by the end of the story, they had spent time together, they had become friends, and he did not want Jeremy Ross to eat the enemy pie. He decided that they were friends, not enemies. So he got to know his enemy, and they actually turned into friends. That's how he changed throughout the story. Great job. Really, really nice, you guys. I hope you enjoyed Enemy Pie and getting to read a story with me, and I hope we get to do it together really soon. Bye, Kipsters.